Oh, very excited about today's guest. We have on Simon Barrett. He is the screenwriter for the newest Shudder original coming out, Azrael, starring Samara Weaving, who is no stranger to the horror genre and shines in this film. Simon, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
We talked about this a little bit off camera. I actually did a film analysis on one of my favorite films called You're Next. It was episode 65 of this show, and it turns out you wrote that film, which is awesome. So to get you back on this show just spontaneously like this is a real blessing. I won't harp on that so much on that episode, but we will definitely get into Azrael. So if you could give me a little bit of your origin story, kind of talk to me like how you kind of broke into the industry, and then we'll get into like the birth of Azrael.
Yeah, so I'm from Columbia, Missouri, kind of small town in the Midwest. My mom was a public librarian, and my dad's a college professor, so I kind of just grew up working class, but in a nice little college town. And I, always wanted to make movies, was borrowing, VHS tape, VHS camcorders from the library and like trying to edit stuff with like 2 decks until I finally got like a 16 millimeter camera that a friend stole from a
Oh,
school.
wow.
And just like kind of doing stuff like that. And I went to only a couple of years of film school and I focused on cinematography actually. I focused on just technical filmmaking. I didn't study writing at all. But as soon as I graduated and I needed to get a job, and was working a day job, actually doing private investigations work for a decade, like over 10 years. I did PI work while I was kind of building
Wow.
my film career. I wrote a low budget horror film called Dead Birds, which I wrote like when I was living in New York in like 2001. It's a long time ago. And the goal of it was to kind of make it cheaply myself. And what happened was I sent it to a friend to see if he was willing to act in it. And he was working for a company that did kind of negative pickup productions for Sony at the time. This was during the DVD boom era where kind of like it
Yeah.
was easier to get kind of genre movies made because they would just sell a certain amount of discs overseas.
Hmm.
And they were like, we'll make this, but like you won't be able to direct it. And I was like, oh well, that sounds like a pretty good deal. It was on the set of that film that I met Adam Wingard and Evan E.L. Katz, director of Azrael, because they were making a film called Homesick in Alabama at the same time. We stayed friends. My screenwriting career ran aground. I wasn't like, I'm not the kind of screenwriter that can like kind of just do like direct to video or
Right.
sequel stuff and make it good. I have full respect for that. I just personally kind of lacked that talent and I wasn't doing great. And, Adam and I started talking about making like really no budget movies together that we could essentially self-finance for just a couple $1,000s. And I guess that's when like the whole kind of Mumblegore thing came about. Horrible Way to Die led to VHS, which led to You're Next. All of those were filmed in Columbia, Missouri, or at least our parts of them were. And once we had You're Next, that was enough of a sale that we kind of had our foot in the door. That's how we got the guest financed with the same producers. And since then, it has been, you know, since then I've basically been able to make a living as a filmmaker.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
So do you feel you had a hand in creating the Mumblegore genre?
I mean, if a Mumblegore genre indeed exists, then I would say, I don't know, I would say Adam and I were maybe instrumental in like maybe defining it, but there were
Yeah.
films that came before us. Like I know the Duplass brothers' Baghead was a Mumblegore title, and there were films before us that were definitely doing something similar. However, I will say that like Adam and I specifically were looking at Mumblecore filmmakers like Joe Swanberg, like Greta Gerwig, and like we were specifically inspired by that because we were trying to make our like low budget horror movies,
Yeah.
and like my attitude was like these Mumblecore movies get right what every low budget horror movie gets wrong, which is character and performance. What they're not getting right is like having a story that anyone would want to
Right.
engage with on any level.
Exactly.
Baghead aside, I like that movie quite a lot. Like some of those films, like the performances and the characters are so engrossing, but then they just kind of meander and end, which is
Yeah, that's
like
true.
life.
They're
I get it.
listless. Yeah.
I get it, but we were kind of like, what if we kind of like it was a specific conversation with Adam on A Horrible Way to Die, where I was like, what if we fuse those sensibilities? Adam knew Joe Swanberg. Joe Swanberg was able to put us in touch with Amy Simas, and they would like just they themselves were considered such mumblecore figures that
Right.
we ended up kind of adopting that. But then when we did Your Next, of course, it was like Kate Steele, Larry Fessenden, Ty West, Calvin Reeder,
Yeah.
and in VHS we had Kentucker Audley. So we definitely were like interested in that kind of cross pollination, and it was a cool time. It was a fun, creative time where like Swanberg was making like 17 movies a year that Adam was like shooting, and and some of which are like amazing, but that was a fairly short-lived thing, because I think Adam and I always had the idea that like this is an aesthetic that really works for a certain style of filmmaking, but we ultimately want to be making different kinds of films.
Right. I mean, because you grow as a writer, you grow as a creator. So,
Ideally.
that's kind of what I'm trying to get at, is that Mumblecore is so different than what you're presenting with Azrael, which is almost no dialogue, very, very little dialogue. And as a writer, I respect that challenge that you took that on, because I myself have been thinking about the day, like, okay, when am I going to try and do that no dialogue script? Because I'm already working on the single location script as another challenge in all of its own.
Yeah.
So, what led to Azrael? Because, I mean, you did incredible world building. Like, this is like, the real deal here.
Yeah, this was a very different one for me. And, and there's a lot of different answers to it, but I'll try to keep it brief and ideally like somewhat coherent. The truth is, one level, I felt like I was starting to use like witty, sarcastic dialogue, or like my kind of dry dialogue, because I don't usually like to do jokes in films, because I think they kind of aren't a good use of narrative time. But I do like for characters to kind of acknowledge the absurdity of their circumstances. Everyone has their different kind of humor sensibility. And I was a little like no one was accusing me of being like great at dialogue, but I kind of felt like after Your Next and The Guest, like there was a certain kind of style of dialogue that I was starting to feel like I wanted to take out of my toolbox. I'd always wanted to do a nonverbal film.
Yeah.
Just because I love early silent cinema, and I just like the idea of like doing like an action movie that's like pure narrative. Other people have done it, of course, and even films like The Naked Prey, Cornell Wilde has like very little dialogue. But a lot of the movies that have no dialogue, of course, are cheating. And they do have dialogue, like either through narration or a broadcast or something. And we really, this was, I knew that I didn't want to do that. And then secondly, the inspiration of this was strange for me, like where I get ideas, I don't always know where kind of my creative ideas come from. And Azrael really was inspired by a recurring nightmare I had over a couple of nights. Yeah, which I almost never happens to me, especially in that I wasn't like the protagonist of this dream. Usually my dreams are kind of about me, usually doing very little. But I was, I guess, going through kind of a dark period, and I had this dream a couple nights in a row. And so I was just like, well, there's got to be like something there, and again, I'm also not I mean, it's probably worth noting, because Azrael has a very specific kind of mythology, that I'm not myself a particularly religious person, but I study, I think I have an intellectual curiosity towards it, I would hope. So I've read a lot of the big texts that so that was kind of interesting to me too, that I was like, well, can I tell a story that's like a post-apocalyptic reality that like, I myself will find mysterious in some ways, but like I have to know the answers. So I found that all to be a fun challenge, and that was just kind of the experiment of it. And then when I wrote it, it was like 48 pages. But Fede Alvarez had told me that like the draft they sold of Don't Breathe was only like 63 pages. So I knew if I could get it close to 60, people would treat it like a real script.
That's what I was wondering. I was actually going to ask you that, because the whole, like, I know some of my listeners are wondering, like, the whole 1 minute per page, right? That goes out the window as soon as you go nonverbal.
Well, that drove us crazy. I mean, I'll be honest with you. Azrael is a short film, which we set out to make. I tend to like films that kind of land at the 90-minute mark or a little under.
It's a feature length film.
It's a feature film, but it's a tight one. It's not a 3-hour one.
Oh yeah, sure. Well, I get it.
No, but sorry, it's not a short film, but it's a short feature film, which was the intention. We knew that essentially we kind of knew that the experiment of this movie might be a little punishing if we like pushed it to like 2 hours. I'm being kind of dead serious here, because it is we were trying to create a grueling horror experience, and there's only so much that you can put people through before it's diminishing returns. People just get exhausted and repetitive and bored. So we knew we wanted it to escalate like very tightly, but yes, there was a lot of like concern and discussion and like, okay, what are our pages adding up to in terms of minutes? Because one of our pages would be like 7 minutes. And then another page would be like 20 seconds. It's
Oh
like,
my
oh
God.
no, because it's all action. And,
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
action sometimes reads short, action sometimes reads long. You're writing it to be coherent and impactful. So yeah, like there was a point where I tried to pad it so that a page would be a minute to screen time. And that was when the script just became a total mess, like an
Yeah.
unreadable disaster. And I think that might be our last draft, but I've already said to Evan that if we like publish the script at all, I want to go back to like my first or second draft, which is pretty wildly different from the final film. We did end up adding some things and some elements that are pretty significant when Evan became involved, you know, but we're collaborative. So it was a good process. But yeah, to be honest, I think if I did not have a body of work, I don't think I could have gotten this film made, because I don't think
Yeah.
people would have had the trust in us that this was gonna like work out. But because this wasn't my first film, you know, we were able to get our producers, Dave Kaplan, Dan Kagan, Jason Clough, they really believed in us, and hopefully, you know, the film rewards that. But yeah, there were definitely sometimes, honestly, where it's scary, where I was like, oh no, have I made a terrible mistake? And I guess
So
that,
like
as always,
screenwriting and
remains to be seen.
screenwriting in general, then really
Yeah,
any
in
screenplay you ever written. Yeah. Oh, it's just a
standard
terrible idea.
process. Yeah, well, you know, I mean, I wrote Azrael fairly quickly. I don't think it took me more than a month, like from start to finish. Again, because honestly, the script is not that long, you know, so I didn't feel like overly invested. But then, yeah, then once it was like, oh, we're really making this thing, like, okay, we should really talk about this.
Which I find surprising, because the world itself seems so accurate. Like it doesn't seem like you just threw it together. It seems like you did research, you did your world building, you know, that they have the scars on the throats. They can't speak, they try and speak, you know. All of this stuff is there. The tent camp, all of it feels like a real, like, culty village. Like, it's all there to me.
Yeah, again, you know, sometimes it's this idea is like, where does our creativity come from? Because I felt like I understood the mythology pretty clearly before I started
Wow.
writing, but I don't know like where that came from. Just like an extrapolation of maybe like, you know, I grew up in mid-Missouri, you know, I grew up in a very Christian part of the country. You know, like Christianity was kind of part of my like public school education.
Yeah.
And so I grew up very steeped in that world, and maybe, you know, that kind of like led something to percolate in my brain over the years. But yeah, I'm very grateful for you saying so. You know, Evan and I talked a lot about the mythology, and Dan Kagan as well. We had a very
Yeah.
elaborate explanation, but ultimately we kind of felt like the explanation wasn't that interesting. It's kind of what you'd assume anyway. So we just kind of were like, well, let's just skip that.
You don't see a lot of post-rapture films, man, and the angle and perspective that you took on it, it wasn't heady. You know, it was like, this is a gritty world that people are trying to get through, and I think it works, which is why it's so cool. And
I
I
think it's
love
like,
the
oh, I was just saying, I think it's just
yeah.
us in like the Left Behind movies. I don't know. I think it's just
Yeah.
um
No, but I think it works though. And here's why, because you have a more, like you said, like you're interested in the theology, but you're not of the theology. So when you kind of are able to distance yourself from a subject matter, it gives you a unique perspective on it. And if you can infuse that into the material, it makes it even more original, which I think is really cool.
well, that's like The Exorcist, right? Like, you know,
Yeah.
William Peter Blatty was a devout Catholic, William Friedkin was a devout atheist, and like he was like, I don't know how to make this scary. Like, it's not inherently frightening to me, the idea
Yeah.
of demons, because I don't believe in them. So how
Right.
am I going to make that scary? And he found a way to make it scary to absolutely every living person. But I think like that I'm always fascinated by that combination of like faith between the creators of The Exorcist.
Yeah.
Because I do think like, you know, even though The Exorcist 3 is amazing, it does kind of feel like if William Peter Blatty had just been able to direct The Exorcist, well, obviously William Friedkin's one of the greatest directors of all time, but it's that like, I think it was his approach of like, I don't know how to make this scary. I guess
Yeah.
I just got to dial it to 10. So I do love that, because I do think like when you're approaching that and you're trying to think of like, what is this to everyone? There are, you know, obviously we have horror movies that are like very non-secular, very religious,
Yeah.
like the Conjuring series. I recently watched The Deliverance on Netflix, the new Lee Daniels film, which
Right.
is pretty explicitly non-secular. But it's just kind of wonder, is this made for a very specific kind of church-going audience in some
Yeah.
cases? But I don't know. It's a good question. I don't know if we're going to get the church crowd with Azrael. What do you
No,
think?
I think it's just it provides a unique perspective for post-rapture that you wouldn't see from somebody that is involved in theology. And I think that's a good. I think having unique visions, having alternative ways of saying something can actually provide a conversation. And I really like that. So
I like it. Yeah, Evan and I guess, are a little worried that, like, we want to make sure that people understand that, like, we're very respectful towards these ideas, but we'll see. We'll see. I think we're kind of excited for that reaction in particular.
no, I mean, I made it a Shudder original for a reason. So I'd
Yeah.
be proud of it, brother. All right. So it left your hands. It got produced. As far as casting of Samara Weaving goes, I mean, when you're writing this thing, we're all guilty of it. We see our protagonist. Was she kind of embodying what you were thinking, what you were creating when you were writing this thing down?
Yeah, I don't, well, I mean, I didn't know that I had a specific, like, I didn't write Azrael with like a specific actor in mind, which sometimes I do when I'm writing a script, either because like I know I specifically want to try to cast someone in that role, or
Yeah.
just because I want to like really clarify the character's voice. It's
Sure.
like, if you imagine a character played by Keith David, for example,
Right. Yeah.
it's like, okay, like he can pull off like this line incredibly, so that can sometimes like shape just the writing process on a dialogue level to make sure that like your smallest supporting characters are unique. To be absolutely honest, I was stunned when Samara said yes to this. Again, we had some mutual friends through Radio Silence. So we had people who could vouch for us. But I like when I heard we were offering the role to Samara Weaving, I was like, well,
That's awesome.
that's a waste of time. Like, she's not going to want to come to Estonia and make this crazy movie with us, you guys. But all right, let's shoot our shot. And I guess Evan just sold her. And also, Samara's just a really hardcore, like truly, legitimately hardcore actor who like
Yeah.
really likes pushing herself, and challenging herself, and I had just a wonderful time working with her. But yeah, I've said a few times, and I do mean this. It's like when he cast Samara, suddenly the problem of like, will you be able to understand what like Azrael is thinking or feeling in this moment is like not an issue anymore.
That's
Because,
awesome.
that was a concern, because the script, she's not communicating like anything. But Samara is so expressive
Yeah.
while still
Exactly.
making everything very real and nuanced. So that, that was a tremendous relief. And also she's very good at action, which that was
Oh
another
yeah, man,
tremendous.
she was hustling in that film. I was like, oh my gosh, look at her putting the work in.
I directed second unit on Azrael, so I did a lot of the shots of Samara running,
Yeah,
just out in the woods with an ATV, and like this is
that's
true.
so
Like
true.
my big Samara day where she was just running through the woods as we were waiting for the sun to go down so that I couldn't shoot anymore. And just, like me and like the Estonian second unit crew on this ATV going alongside her. And at the very end of the day, she's like, yeah, I don't. How many more times do you think we're going to do this? Because I kind of twisted my ankle this
Oh,
morning.
no.
And I'm like, Samara, you have to like tell me that. Like, she's been running all day in
Jeez.
boots in the woods, and yeah, she's just like, yeah, she's one of like those actors where like they're just so into it and so great and like confident to work with that like your biggest worry is just them hurting themselves almost.
Wow.
Yeah, but I mean, I would love to work with Samara again. I
Yeah.
loved working with her on this film. She is phenomenal.
Well, before I let you go, do you have any advice for the writers out there that are doing this?
Oh God. Well, I mean, of course, I mean, first of all, back when I did Your Next, I would have had no business being on a show called The Successful Screenwriter. If you had a sibling unsuccessful screenwriter show, I would have done very well on that. I assume other guests have made that joke, but I'll make it anyway. Advice to like up and coming screenwriters. Look, I do always give the same exact advice, but I've had a very weird career. And I am kind of in a unique position as a screenwriter in that I tend to produce my own films, or direct them. And so I tend to be more involved in the production process. And I would advise screenwriters to do that. I mean, the truth is I had someone I'm here at Fantastic Fest in Austin. And I've had like multiple people come up to me and ask me that exact question. And the only thing I ever say is write something that you know how it is going to get made. If that means a single location, if that means like my uncle's got a van, like, all right, write a movie in a van.
I love that.
Because having a produced film is so much more meaningful than having an unproduced screenplay.
So true.
I know that sounds like a lot of work, especially for us writers who spend all day indoors. And it's like, wait, I got to go out and like find like 50 people who want to work for free to make a movie. That sounds a little challenging. It is. It sucks. But the tools of filmmaking are so democratized now in a way that they were not when I was coming up and everyone was still shooting on film. That there's a negative aspect of that, which is you're now competing with every single person in the world that has like a camera in their pocket. But there's great things about that too, and that like there really is not anything kind of holding you back from telling your story if you want to tell it. But that's the truth. I say this a lot too. I think Dead Birds, which was the first script I sold back in 2002, it got made in 2003. I think that was the 20th feature script I wrote.
Wow.
And it was the first script I wrote with an eye towards production, with an eye towards like, okay, I think I can raise about 60 grand and make this myself, shooting it on 16 millimeter. I had like a whole production strategy for it as I was writing it. And sure enough, that was the first script that I got paid $25,000 for that script. They made it for $1.5 million. I was a screenwriter.
It's awesome.
But if I had not designed that project to be so makeable, which I was only at the point of like low budget filmmaking where I was starting to even understand what that meant, that film, I would not have any kind of career. And similarly, if I wasn't able to then write something like A Horrible Way to Die or Your Next was 700,000. So that's not totally cheap, but that's, we made that for well under $1 million.
Mm-hmm. That's a low budget film, technically.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And one of the things that I did when I was writing Your Next is I didn't write in a gore gag or a killing that I wouldn't know how to do myself. Like the blender in the head is like the cheapest gag in the world. It's a blood hose in a fake blender and a little bit of smoke. It's like anyone could do that gag, but it's effective. So it was stuff that I knew we could achieve. And that's maybe unique to my career in that I have been involved in very like low budget filmmaking. And so I kind of know a bit more like the technical tricks that I can get away with. But I also just think like I have so many like aspiring screenwriters or aspiring professional screenwriters, I should say, because if you write a script, you're a screenwriter. So, that's the reality. So don't carry that around. Don't say you're an aspiring screenwriter, but aspiring professional screenwriter is a different thing. That's tough. And I have so many people come up to me and go, oh, I got this script, and they start describing it to me. I'm like, have you noticed that not a lot of original $200 million movies are getting made right now?
Yeah, it's true.
And the people that are making them tend to be like Christopher Nolan. It's like, like I understand the desire to not creatively restrict yourself if you have a beautiful vision of the film you want to tell. But I have people come up to me and I'm like, I've been working in the film industry for 20 years and I couldn't get my manager to read this, if I wrote it myself, So it's hard. And I think like as cinema changes, there's a lot of talk about our theaters dying. Theaters are never going to die, but because kids always need things to go out and do on dates. But the films that are doing well in theaters, that is changing. We have changed the way people watch movies, over the last 10, 20 years. And I think just the best thing you can be if you want to make a living as a screenwriter right now is smart about scale and smart about the market.
Amazing.
Again, it wasn't until I was like, I'll write a low budget horror movie. Like, I like those. Why haven't I written one yet? That everyone was like, oh, you have a script. I'd actually like to read your script. Prior to that, no one had said those words.
That's amazing.
So, write a low budget horror movie that you think you know how to make yourself, and maybe someone will buy it from you and pay you, and you don't have to do the work.
Well, I usually ask if there's anything I didn't ask that I should have.
I think we covered it. I mean, especially when it comes to Azrael, it does kind of seem like the less we explain and the more the better.
Well, go ahead.
No, I was done.
Azrael is a Shudder original, and do we know when it's coming out?
Well, Azrael opens in theaters this Friday, September 27th through IFC and Shudder.
Awesome.
And then I don't actually know when it hits Shudder itself.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I think I maybe have that information, but I don't remember it. But it doesn't matter anyway. See it in theaters.
See it in theaters, absolutely.
Unless you can't, and that's totally fine. Then see it on the Shudder. What's your point?
Listen, you have to go to the theater, and you have to see it. There's no question.
Well,
right.
I've gotten out of the habit because I know some people find the theatrical experience. For me, the theatrical experience is like obviously like a deeply meaningful thing.
It's my church, man.
Exactly. That's very important for me. But I recognize this for some people. It's like a horrible, stressful. Get out to the multiplex. And I want to be respectful of that too. That's the nice thing about working with IFC and Shudder is they get these movies in front of the right people, in front of their audiences.